Soon after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the Gallup chairman and CEO Jim Clifton attended a high-level meeting in which Vice President Dick Cheney was asked, "What does the Muslim world think of what has happened?" His answer was, "I have no idea." Jim Clifton realized then and there that no one in Washington had any idea of what 1.3 billion Muslims were thinking. And yet they were working on intricate strategies that were going to change the world for all time. That's a quote from Jim Clifton. So Clifton commissioned his company, the world-renowned Gallup organization that really has a great reputation among Westerners, to undertake this enormous job of finding out what Muslims think. The result is Who Speaks for Islam? Got to get a picture of this, right? What a billion Muslims really think. Based on 6 years of research and more than 50,000 interviews representing 1 billion Muslims who reside in more than 35 nations that are predominantly Muslim or have sizable Muslim populations. The study represents 90% of the world's Muslim community and a quarter of the Earth's population. This poll is the largest and most comprehensive study of its kind.
I want to start by telling you a story. I've always been intrigued by something that I would see over and over. On one hand, poll after poll after poll shows that people in many Muslim countries have anti-American views. So they view the United States unfavorably. They view the government unfavorably. But then when they're asked about the American people, you see studies where 90% of young people say Americans are friendly. 90% say Americans are friendly. And yet when it comes to the American government, you have 87% of them saying the American government is aggressive and easily provoked. And I always wondered about that, because what was so interesting about these studies that said that 90% of Muslims think Americans are friendly is they've never met an American. And I was so perplexed by this, because you've got people who believe that the government of this country is aggressive and unfriendly, and yet 90% think Americans are friendly. And I never understood the disconnect. And I was talking to a very intelligent woman over the summer when I was visiting Egypt, and I asked her, how do you reconcile these two things? And she said, friends. And I looked at her and she said, the show Friends. That story just illustrated to me the power of media to humanize. And so what I'd like to talk to you about is what often is not heard from, and that is the opinions and the views of Muslims around the world who don't have a lot of their own media that's consumed by Americans. So post 9/11, violence has grown exponentially as Muslims and non-Muslims alike continue to be victims of global terrorism. Terrorist attacks have occurred from Morocco to Indonesia, from Madrid to London, and wars in Afghanistan and Iraq continue to rage on. So is all of this evidence of an all-out clash or war between the West and 1.3 billion Muslims? The vital missing piece among the many voices that have weighed in on this question are the actual views of everyday Muslims. We don't see them in the media, and we don't see them in the news. With all that is at stake, though, for the West and for the Muslim world, indeed for the entire globe, the time has urgently come to democratize the debate. Who Speaks for Islam is about this silenced majority. They have been spoken for by their governments, they have been spoken for by vocal extremists, and the last people we've heard from are actual ordinary people, everyday Muslims, and what they really think. So the vast amounts of data represent the views of the world's Muslims, revealing answers to the questions everyone is asking. What is the root of anti-American sentiment in the Muslim world? Who are the extremists? Do Muslims desire democracy? And if so, what would it look like? What do Muslim women really want? The concept of the book is actually quite simple. With these questions in hand, we let the statistical evidence, the voices of 1 billion Muslims, not individual experts or extremists, dictate the answer. The results often challenge conventional wisdom. Gallup's research produced a number of key insights. I think the most important is this, though. The conflict, whatever conflict exists today, between Muslims and the United States is far from inevitable, because it is more about policy or the perception of policy than it is about principles. However, until and unless decision makers of all kinds listen directly to ordinary people and gain an accurate understanding of the conflict, extremists on all sides will continue to gain ground.
I met Dalia through the Brookings Institute and got to read an advanced copy, as you did a couple of months ago, and it really was a very striking experience for me. For many of the reasons that I think Dalia, much more eloquently than I can, articulated. It is a chance for this media-infused and heightened high ground that is co-opted by the extremists, and it's really finally the people on both sides of this divide got to speak. It really is, I think, the most cohesive voice for this situation that we find ourselves in, and it's obviously a very tangled and complex situation, and it is prone to the loudest voice. It's prone to the most extreme action, and this, in a very cohesive, scientific way, just was eye-opening to me. And some of the things that were most telling to me was how much we really did have in common. And again, when I say we, both the West and the United States and the Muslim world are not these two monoliths. They're much more nuanced, and that's something that's, I think, in the book as well. But there are things that were striking to me, and one that I felt particularly guilty about, and that really spoke to my own experience working on a show that's about terrorism, was the comment about what do Americans admire most about the Muslim world, and that the two responses were nothing and don't know was a very telling and very dangerous detail. And anyway, that's part of the, I have also found myself being a media maker, being a Hollywood guy. I had this epiphany that what I did wasn't. I sort of hid behind my typewriter and my cement wall, saying it's just a television show and I am just writing a story. But this, in the charged world that we live in, and with the subject matter that obviously I find myself writing about, it wasn't that simple a response. I couldn't. What part of it was denial, what part of it was ignorance, I really can't say. But clearly, what I was doing was having an impact beyond my own sort of parochial interest in telling the most exciting story and getting the largest possible audience. I am making it, a personal project of mine to expose as many writers as I can to this book and to the resources of the Hollywood engagement to help these storytellers, get their story straight and their facts straight.